to contract, and then we're going to end up with a discussion of non-competition agreements. The way to think about the first part of this lecture is that in part one, we talked a lot about how you make a contract, the elements of it, what makes it enforceable. Here, generally, we're talking about, all right, now that you have a contract, what is the legal effect of performance? What if somebody fails to live up to their promise in a contract? How does breach work? How does performance work? And so forth. And how can you get out of the contract through a legally recognized defense? So we'll begin by talking about the fact that in every contract there are rights, of course, but also duties. And we say that when all of the duties have been performed, which we call complete performance, then the parties are legally discharged from further performance. There's no breach, and they have no further legal responsibility. But what if one, or perhaps even both parties to the contract, have been unable to fulfill their duties? The promises they made will not be completely fulfilled. The legal question is, what is a breach? How does that work? What are the remedies? But also, can the non-breaching party be released from its responsibilities? Can you say, well, the other side's in breach, so I don't have to do what I'm supposed to do? And that may seem a little vague right now, so I'm going to go through a series of scenarios that I've used for quite a while that hopefully will shed some light on this. I'm going to go through each scenario, factually talk about it, kind of get you to thinking about it in terms of fairness and common sense, and then we'll go through the legal analysis. First contract. We have a cleaning service called Apex, janitorial service. It contracts with the owners of buildings to clean offices. In this particular case, the owner of the building is IBIS. IBIS has an office building with about 50 offices, and the tenants expect the landlord, IBIS, to clean the offices. This is how it usually works. So IBIS and Apex enter into a contract, a calendar year contract, that begins January 1 year at a time, can be renewed, and the contract provides that IBIS will pay $5,000 a month flat fee to Apex, and Apex is responsible for cleaning 50 offices 5 nights a week. Now, the contract would probably spell out the specifics of what that entails in terms of the cleaning and the expectations. Contract begins, work begins, everything's fine for a few months. And then a few months into the contract, let's say May of that year, one morning IBIS gets a call from a tenant who says, hey, what's going on here? Our office here was not cleaned very well last night. We got trash that wasn't dumped, the kitchen wasn't clean, etc. Okay, now IBIS is embarrassed, not happy. IBIS calls up somebody at Apex and said, what's going on here? Apex says, well, we were a little bit short-handed last night in staff, and some people called in sick, and we're sorry. We just couldn't get it all done. Here's the legal question. Number one, is that a breach? Did Apex breach the contract? Common sense. Well, they didn't do exactly what they were supposed to, so maybe, in fact, yes, there was a minor technical breach. There's a second legal question, perhaps even more important. Can IBIS terminate the contract? Can they say, all right, you screwed up, you breached, we don't have to pay you anymore. As of this point, you can't come back, we will stop making payments, we're going to replace you with somebody else. Common sense. It doesn't seem very fair, does it? It's kind of harsh. But at what point does it have to be bad enough so that IBIS could legally stop performance, get out of the contract, terminate it, and stop payment? Clearly, logically, there would have to be some point, such as where this has happened multiple times, and it's many different offices, and the failure to clean offices got to the point of just really gross, and the tenants are complaining. What we need to figure out legally is, how do you know if you're IBIS when you can pull the plug legally? Hold that thought until we get to the technical stuff. But I want to give you a couple more to contrast it. Scenario 2, fire Harley Davidson allowed legally to reject the contract, to reject the shipment and refuse to pay? Probably not, right? We go to one other scenario. Vern runs a fireworks stand on the Sedgwick County Butler County line every year for the 4th of July holiday. He has a contract with a supplier of fireworks called Big Boom Fireworks. And the contract calls for 2 deliveries, one in June and the second on July 1st. Every year, Vern has a delivery on July 1st because there's always a big run at the end for people coming in to get the fireworks. July 1st comes, July 1st goes, no truck. The Big Boom truck does not show up until July 5th. Vern is tearing down the tent. It's a breach. And you'll see the comparison to scenario 2 because both involve the shipment that is 4 days late. Obviously, you can see the difference here. This is not a minor breach. This is a big breach. What's the legal term for that is a material breach. Can Vern refuse to accept the shipment? Can Vern refuse to pay for the fireworks? Again, common sense. He ought to. He didn't get the value of that second shipment. Not only that, he's out a tremendous amount of revenue. His lost profits are significant. So, what you see here is that the factual circumstances are critical. And so when we have these general rules we're going to talk about, they are designed to take into account each and every case on a case-by-case basis. Now, this next slide is very important. This is the law. This is the part you need to know for quiz and test, how this works. And then we're going to come back to the analysis of the 3 scenarios. Imagine this black line at the bottom, this horizontal line is a continuum. Lawyers like to use continuums in our discussions, the way we think. On the right-hand side, the red line with the arrow that says complete performance, that's 100% performance, as good as you can get. When there is complete performance, meaning a party to a contract has fulfilled every single thing it promised, it is legally discharged for further performance, and it is not a breach. And that's what happens most of the time. At the other end of the continuum is 0% performance, which doesn't happen too often. And then, of course, in the real world, there's this big space in between. Think of it in terms of starting with complete performance, and there's a little minor breach as we work down 95%, 90%, and so forth. Anything less than complete performance is a breach of contract. Now, it might be a teeny tiny little breach that's no big deal, but technically it's a breach. Doesn't mean you can sue and win, though, unless you can prove damages. But it is a breach. And we call it a minor breach, and that is the legal term for it. The red line labeled substantial performance is very important. It's probably the most difficult concept on this slide. And the reason is because it's a moving target. Complete performance is pretty easy. Substantial performance, here's the concept, that as you move up the scale, up the continuum towards 100%, the performance by the breaching party, though not complete, is pretty good. It's good enough that the non-breaching party received the majority of what it bargained for. In other words, the breach is not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. And anything less than substantial performance is a material breach. And I want to talk in just a moment about the legal effect of that. But how in the world do we determine where to draw that substantial performance line? And in the real world, it is difficult. I had a client one time that had a service contract, a business that somebody else was providing a service, and they called up one time and said, hey, they're in breach. We bugged them about it. They just can't seem to get their act together. Can we pull the plug and terminate the contract? And that's a very important question. Business people have to make educated guesses. Now, if it ends up in court later in the breach of contract case, it's the jury that has to decide where that line is. The reason it's not, an absolute number is because it depends on the nature of the contract. the non-breaching party is excused from further performance. Let's do our analysis. We'll start with the easiest one, which is burden versus benefit. I think by now you know what type of breach that is. Therefore, burn is excused from further performance, which means he does not have to accept the shipment of fireworks. He does not have to pay for them. In fact, this breach is so significant that the court might well allow Byrd to recover his lost profits for that last shipment, what should have been the last shipment, which is very unusual. It's actually difficult to recover lost profits. Normally, you can only sue on the contract price. There is one scenario, and that's called consequential damages. The term will come across later. How would Byrd prove his lost profits? I mean, he can't sue for revenue. Revenue is total. He can only sue for profit he would have made on the sale of those fireworks. Well, if he's had that stand there for several years, he would put on evidence of his normal revenue over July 1 to July 4. If he hasn't been at that place very long, or this is his first year, he might be able to prove it with evidence from competitors, believe it or not. You don't have to prove absolute mathematical certainty, but you do have to prove something that the jury would consider reasonable, a reasonable calculation. Harley-Davidson versus Firestone. This one is also easy. Clearly a minor breach. Yeah, the tires were delivered late, but Harley-Davidson was going to slap them in the warehouse anyway for a few weeks. Possibly it will suffer overtime if its employees had to come in on a Saturday and store them. Okay, so maybe they could sue Firestone for the overtime, but Harley-Davidson would not be able to reject the shipment. General rule would not be able to reject the shipment, would not be able to refuse payment. The most difficult one for this analysis by far is IBIS versus Apex. It depends. It depends on so many factors. How bad was the breach? How much of an impact to the tenants and to IBIS overall was it? If it was just one or two minor complaints that never happened again, that would be a minor breach. But what if it happens 2, 3, 4 times? What if the complaints are significant by tenants? What if tenants are threatening to cancel the lease? There has to be a point where it is bad enough, material enough, that IBIS can say, all right, we terminate the contract, we're not paying you anymore, and we're going to find a substitute cleaning service. It's up to the jury, ultimately, how to decide that. Now, one twist on the silver lining. And this falls under Article 2 of the UCC. It's just the law. Suppose in the Harley-Davidson Firestone contract, there was a phrase, time is of the essence in connection with delivery date. The law is that if that phrase is used, then any late delivery at all is a material breach. Even though factually it might be a minor breach, the way the law looks at it is the parties have agreed by contract to make delivery date a material breach. Now, if Firestone doesn't have to agree to that term, they can try to negotiate it out. But if they accept the contract with that term and the delivery is late, they know the shipment can be rejected. Now, what that does, in fact, is make Firestone pay particular attention to delivery date. Now, that's probably the reason Harley would put it in the contract. Now, we're going to talk about defenses to contracts. So there are actually quite a few. What I mean by defenses is if somebody's sued for breach of contract, they may try to argue as a defense that, hey, there really was not a binding contract. I should be able to get out of it due to legal technicality or some factual circumstance. So I'm going to mention briefly fraud and duress and undue influence. These are explained more in the notes. I think they're pretty straightforward in the notes. Fraud is a tort we've talked about. If someone commits fraud, if somebody lied to you about whether the basement leaked and you didn't have any reason to know otherwise, you can get out of the contract. Duress and undue influence, as I explained, those are kind of specific. They're not defenses that work very often in contract cases. Duress is you caved in and agreed to something in the contract. You didn't have freedom in the contract, basically. Well, that's pretty unusual in business. Now, maybe you could have that in a The one I want to talk about now, though, is mistake. And this is an argument that is made quite a bit. Here's the factual scenario I'm going to give you. This is a real case in Wichita. And as I work through this, I'll explain how the law works. The city of Wichita has, from time to time, various sculptures that they put up on city property. And there was a large metal sculpture. This is the official name for it, Upright Form V. And in 2004, the city took it down, threw it in a warehouse, and later had a city auction along with a bunch of other stuff. The stuff, I should point out, that the city thought was essentially junk. A guy named Matt Cuellar went to the auction. He had done his homework. He knew who the sculptor was. He knew this was a pretty important sculpture. And he bid, and he got the bid. Nobody else wanted it, so his bid was $287. He got the sculpture. Well, later, it somehow came out, I guess, in the newspaper or whatever, and the city found out that it had just sold for $287. What it thought was junk was actually, as you can see, the sculpture by a famous artist, and it was worth market value of $30,000. What the city did is went to Matt and said, "Give us that sculpture back. We didn't know this was worth a lot," as if he pulled some kind of fast one. He won it at a public auction by getting the high bid. Matt's defense was, "You, city, were mistaken as to the value. You had an opportunity to check out who this sculpture was, and to find out its value. Yes, I knew it was worth quite a bit, but both sides had the opportunity to check it out. That's your problem. It's a unilateral mistake. One person made a mistake. You, city, not me. There was no fraud." And the court ruled in favor of Matt. And here's the law part. A unilateral mistake of a material fact is not a defense to a contract. A mutual mistake, where both sides would be mistaken, can be. It's not automatic, but it can be a defense to a contract. So that's the memorization part. Mutual mistake can be a defense to a contract. But because only one party was mistaken, the court said the contract is valid, and let's to keep the sculpture. Now, another type of defense that can be raised when somebody is sued for breach of contract is statute of limitations. And we talked a little bit about statute of limitations already, probably. But for most causes of action, there are statutes in the state of Kansas that set out what time frame the lawsuit must be brought. And if you bring that lawsuit after that date, when the statute of limitations is expired, you can be thrown out of court and summary judgment entered against you. And that this is something that is done from time to time. People sometimes file lawsuits late for various reasons. Medical malpractice is 2 years, for example. Negligence. It's 2 years from when the malpractice occurred or when the patient found out about the malpractice, basically when the injury was discovered. For breach of contract, and this is the memorization part, the written contract in Kansas is 5 years from the date of the breach, not 5 years from the date the contract was signed. So if somebody breaches a contract, you've got 5 years. I'll give you an example of this in a moment. For oral contracts, it's 3 years. Rationale is oral contracts being subject to he said, she said, and therefore less reliable. We're not going to give people as long to sue. But it's 3 years from the date of the breach. Now, all that's well and good, but how do you know the difference between a written contract and an oral contract? It's not as silly as it sounds. How much of writing does there have to be? How formal does the contract have to be? Here's the example. It's a case I worked on. A woman, an elderly woman who was quite wealthy, in a small town in Kansas, was hit up by a brother who was kind of a deadbeat, according to the rest of the family. And he went to her several times and asked her for money, a loan. And she said, okay. And she made him a series of loans. Each loan was, for kind of to simplify this a little bit, was for about $6,000. She made she would write loan, the word loan, and then the word due date. And she would put a specific date that the loan was due to be paid back, and usually it was about 6 months or so. But she had a specific date for each one. Now this went on, for a year or so, and as I said, and he never paid it back. He didn't pay any of it back. Time goes on, and then the woman became terminally ill, and she had 2 adult daughters, and both of them were doing quite well financially. For this family, the woman and her daughters, $24,000 was not a huge amount. For the guy, apparently, it was a huge deal. The brother. All right, what happened was, the woman was dying. She said to her daughters, now I never worried too much about the money because I didn't really need it, but your uncle borrowed this money from me. And she showed her daughters her records of this. She was keeping notes of all of it. And she said, he's way past due on each of these loans. After I'm gone, you will be the executors of my estate. I want you to collect it. I want the money to go to you and my grandchildren. A few months later, she passes away. The granddaughters are in fact, the daughters are in fact made executors to the estate, and they hired me to sue the brother. The estate of their mother versus their uncle was awkward. But they were very upset with him, in part because he had done this to their mother, and also because there was word going around the various family members that he had said, I'm not going to see this money paid back. I'm not going to give his nieces anything. He was jealous that they were rich, the word was. So we filed the lawsuit really as a matter of justice and fairness. The daughters didn't think he would ever pay. In fact, they actually thought he'd blown them up. We are moving towards trial, and the brother, his attorney, filed a motion for summary judgment, asking the court to enter judgment in favor of the defendant, which means final judgment, not just dismissal, final judgment, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired, that we had filed the lawsuit too late. What he was referring to is the statute of limitations for a whole contract is 3 years. It had been, by this time, more than 3 years since any of the loans had been made. In other words, even the due date, for the final loan. And it was true. We were more than 3 years after the final due date. Well, the reason was the mother had not told her daughters about this for quite some time. But we were within 5 years of the breach of each loan. So we went to court and we argued it. My argument was that this was a written contract. Now, I would have preferred that my client's mother had her brother sign a formal contract called loan agreement, and so that there was no question about this. But here was my argument. Judge, what are the key terms of the contract for loan? The fact that it was a loan? Well, on the check, she wrote the word loan. The amount, we have the amount on the check. Due date, we have that. She wrote the due date for each check. And the signature of the borrower, we have that. When he cashed or endorsed the check, he signed his name on the back. We had a case from Missouri. It was on point, not precedent, but interesting. We won. The judge ruled that it was, in fact, a written contract. We stayed in court. There was no summary judgment. We went to trial. We won. The judge found that the brother was lying. His excuse, by the way, was that it was a gift, not a loan. So I had to cross-examine him. Then why does it say loan? The judge basically concluded he was lying. Now here's an interesting aspect of real life. Even though he and his lawyer had pretty much settled on he didn't have money, after the trial, after we got a verdict of $24,000, his lawyer called me up within days and said, we have a right to appeal, and that would drag out about a year. Would your clients take $17,000 now, full payment, right off the rest, and settle this? And we won't appeal. I called my clients, and they were not happy, mostly because he'd been lying about the fact he didn't have the money. But the reality was, bird in hand, better to have cash now, and then risk losing on appeal, which I don't think we would have, and dragging this out, and maybe he files bankruptcy. So we took the money. And that's why those cases sell. Now, another type of defense to contract seller agrees to accept that offer and the buyer cannot sell their current house by March 15th or can't qualify for mortgage, they don't have to go through with the contract. So it's really important when you're making contracts to be careful about how these conditions work, depending on which side you're on. Another way that a contract can be terminated legally before fully performed is what's called discharge by agreement. What that means is that the parties mutually agree to terminate the contract. You can't do it unilaterally. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to terminate this. You can't do that legally, at least. But if both sides agree and they both give consideration for that, then it can be binding. Now, I say the example is pro athletes. This happens quite a bit, where an athlete has, let's say, 2 years left on a contract with an NFL football team and just doesn't want to play for that team anymore and, retires. There's no way they can prevent them from retiring. Technically, all they can do is prevent them from playing for another team for 2 years. Well, let's suppose they retire. Some of you remember Brett Favre in this situation. And immediately decide they want to play for their team. And they tell, after they've been released by the team or whatever, not released completely, but they're not playing for the team. What sometimes happens is the athlete goes to the team and says, look, I know I've got 2 more years obligation to you, and I can't play for anybody else for 2 years. Would you let me out of my contract so I can go play for somebody else? The team will say either no, they have the right to say no, or they can say, yeah, if you give us consideration. In other words, if you buy out the contract, give us $1 million, something like that. That would be discharged by agreement. Now, this is technically more of a settlement issue than it is a defense, but it's a very important concept I want you to remember. And the legal term for it is accord and satisfaction. Again, sometimes it's easier to explain an example and then come back and explain the law. I had a client that was in the construction business, and I got a call one day from their finance guy who said, all right, we did some work for somebody, and about $50,000 worth. We billed them for $50,000, and this customer is claiming he doesn't like the quality of our work and he refuses to pay us $50,000. We think he's just messing with us, but that's what he's claiming. Okay, and we've been hassling him. We want the payment. $50,000, and we just got a letter in the mail from him, a check for $30,000. And in the memo section of the check, it says, endorsement of payee will constitute a receipt in full when the check is paid. And this finance guy was pretty clever. He thought he was smart enough to call me. He said, am I correct that if I cash this check or deposit this check, that we have accepted $30,000 in full payment and we cannot go after him for the other $20,000? And I said, did you take business loan? For any chance? No, I said, you're right. You're right. If you endorse and cash or deposit that check, the law treats that as an offer to make a settlement. And you have accepted $30,000 as payment in full, and you cannot go after him for the other 20. You write it off. He said, does that mean I have to send the check back to him if I want to pursue the full 50? And I said, yes. And he said, man, we could really use this check for payroll and some other things, but on principle, I want the full amount. And he returned the check. This is something that's very important to know. And this is so common in the construction business that often there's a red stamp that is stamped on the back of the check with these words. By the way, for quiz purposes, this is a unilateral contract. It's an offer. The unilateral nature is if you cash this check, you just accepted an offer to settle for 30. And my client didn't have a chance to negotiate. They either had to accept the check, sell it, or reject it. Now, let's talk about what happens when there is a breach and a lawsuit. What are the remedies? And we'll talk about damages in a moment. Equitable remedies mean essentially non-monetary remedies. It has to do with courts of equity, which go back hundreds of years. position is asking the court to cancel the contract. It's undoing the contract. It is used quite a bit for fraud cases where you say, hey, I was lied to, now I've got a leaky basement, I don't want this house anymore. I want to give the house back to the seller and I want my money back. Same thing for maybe a really bad car you bought, something like that. Undo the contract. Specific performance is the other side of that, which is you want the court to order the other side to go forward with performance. Now, this is actually an unusual remedy, except for real estate. It works well with real estate. The best example is you are a buyer of the house, you have a contract to buy. Closing date is coming soon. You're ready, willing, and able to close and to pay the money. And right before closing, you find out that the seller is backing out. Now, the seller does not have a good reason. They just changed their mind. Well, the seller's position will be, okay, yeah, we get it. You don't get our house, but you still have your money. In fact, we'll even give you your earnest money back. Well, that puts you in a terrible position. And if we didn't have specific performance as a remedy, there's no incentive for the sellers to go through the contract. So you would sue for breach, and you would ask the judge to make the seller close to perform. It only works for real estate and unusual items of personal property, things that are kind of one of a kind, like an antique, a painting, an original painting, not a copy, things like that. Reformation is asking the court to reform or rewrite a legal document, typically a contract. It's a situation where the real issue is that there's a clause in the contract that you believe got messed up, or as a matter of fairness needs to be tweaked. The rest of the contract's okay. You're not trying to get out of it, but you're asking the judge to reform it and to effectively rewrite it. I will tell you, judges aren't crazy about this. They really believe parties should be stuck with their contracts. But at the end of this lecture, I will give you an example of reformation. Most of the time, the remedy that's sought in a breach of contract case is damages. The basic measure of damage in a breach of contract case is compensatory damages, to compensate the non-breaching party, to put them in the position economically they would have been if the contract had been performed. Generally, that means the difference between the contract price and what actually happened. If you go back to the bicycle example I gave you, this is why you can't sue for the full amount of the contract price for the bicycle if you still have the bicycle. If you sell the bicycle, then you ask for the difference between what the contract price was and what you ultimately got for the bicycle. And that is the way it works in most contract cases. As I said earlier, sometimes you can sue for lost profits. It's called consequential damages. And there is this thing called liquidated damages, which I want to explain. Liquidated damages is kind of unusual, but it's a situation where the parties at the time they make the contract agree that if there is a breach down the road, it would be difficult, very difficult, to calculate the actual compensatory damages. So they set out a formula or a dollar amount. They literally agree what the damages will be. As long as that agreed amount of damages is in the ballpark, is reasonable, the courts will enforce this. It is true that if it's really one-sided and the amount of damages are onerous, what's called a penalty, it may not stand in the court. I'll give you two situations where this is fairly common. One, construction cases. When highways are being built, it is really common for the state, in this case KDOT, I'm going to use that example, I want you to remember this example. KDOT, Kansas Department of Transportation, had a contract to upgrade a 4-lane highway in northern Kansas, basically resurface it and complete that, everything. The contractor on that project had in the contract a clause that said the due date for this highway to be done sure the contractor is staying on track. What's interesting is the contractor then, because the contractor is just the person who organizes it, and they're not the ones that actually do the work. They have subcontractors for different pieces of it. My client was a subcontractor from Montana, whose part of the contract was to put the striping down. The striping in the middle of the road, the yellow stripe, white stripes, and so on. And it's not just paint, it's a pretty sophisticated plastic that's embedded in the concrete. Well, it was my client that actually caused the project to be late a month and a half. My client didn't show up for a month and a half. We ended up settling, and my client paid $150,000 for liquidating damages. Now, the other scenario where this comes up, and this relates to the non-competition agreement later we're going to talk about, so I'm going to hold off from the full explanation. But it is used quite a lot now in non-competition agreements as a measure of damages, as an alternative measure of damages. So I'll hold off on that explanation. Okay, the general rule, the American rule, I think I mentioned this earlier this semester, is that when parties are in a lawsuit, each side is responsible to pay their own attorney fees. That is the general rule. There's only two exceptions. One is if you are suing under a statute which permits or requires the losing party to reimburse you for your attorney fees. The other, under the American rule, is if the contract itself has an attorney fee clause. I was always amazed when I was practicing how often I would have clients call up saying, hey, we shipped some goods to California, $75,000. We need to sue that guy. And I would look at the contract and I would say, you don't have an attorney fee clause. And they're going to be like, well, what do you mean? Well, if we sue them for $75 and win, you will have to pay me my attorney fees. And it could be $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. And they would be like, well, that's unfair. But you don't have an attorney fee clause. If you had an attorney fee clause, which said that in the event of a lawsuit, the losing party has to reimburse the winning party, it's called the prevailing party attorney fees, then we could sue for 75, get 75 plus they'd have to pay my attorney fees if we win. That's a big difference. And the reason it's so important, the reason I stress this is I can't believe how many people don't know this. And it enhances the settlement. Now, imagine if I'm negotiating with the attorney for the other side, and I was in this situation several times, and they know we don't have an attorney fee clause. Here's how it's going to work. We're going to sue your client for 75. Okay. Well, it's going to take you months to collect it because he doesn't have much cash. And furthermore, even if you win, it's going to take months. Oh, by the way, your client's going to have to pay your attorney fees. Would you take $40,000 now? And sometimes my client would. Just an economic reality. Imagine though, if we had an attorney fee clause, and I could say, if we win, you're going to have to pay 75 plus my attorney fees. Suddenly, the settlement value goes way up. And as I note here, the English rule, which is some people think we should adopt, is that automatically the loser must pay the winner's attorney fees in pretty much all lawsuits. There is a defense, or it's actually a rule that's applied in breach of contract cases, particularly certain kinds of contract cases, where the non-breaching party, the plaintiff, has a duty to do what it can to mitigate the damages that it's suing for. In other words, in effect, to help the defendant reduce the damages. The example I'm going to give right now is commercial leases. This is very, very common. It's standard actually in a commercial lease. Works like this. 5-year lease. Tenant moves out after second year. Business closes. Can't pay the rent. 3 years of rent left. Landlord could sue for those 3 years of rent. But the landlord has a legal duty to mitigate damages by finding a replacement tenant to get in there as quickly as possible and to offset the rent. And if a landlord gets somebody immediately at the same rent, the tenant that abandoned or left will have to pay very, very little in damages. The interesting part of this mitigation of damage award isn't so much to help the defendant, that's the effect of it. It's actually because in our society, we don't like non-productive assets. We don't like buildings, retail space that's empty. So it's an automatic duty. Just a quick point about this one. Sometimes when a person breaches a contract, like if you miss a car loan payment, your payment's due on the first and you're 15 days late. If you look at your loan agreement carefully, the bank could repo your car pretty much immediately. They could just call it a breach and go. But usually they will stick in a clause that says that we have the right for each breach to waive it. What that means is they could take the position that, all right, this time we'll let you pay late, we'll charge you late charges, but we won't call you on the breach. We won't assert a breach of contract and go after you for money. Usually then they'll have another statement that says, but understand that just because we waive the breach once doesn't mean we'll do so in the future. Now, this is a topic that overlaps with property law, and I will undoubtedly talk a little bit about it later. So I'm going to kind of just talk in general terms right now, but I do want to explain what an assignment is of a contract versus a sublease. Anyone who has a contract, well, I should say the general rule is that someone who has a contract can assign his or her rights in the contract to somebody else. And the assignee now has the obligation to fulfill. I mean, they literally step into the shoes of the assignor. So let me run through some general rules. This is kind of confusing. If the contract is silent about assignment or sublease, it doesn't say anything at all about it. The general rule is you can assign your rights to a third party. If the contract says that you cannot assign or sublease at all, if it's a complete prohibition of assignment or sublease, generally that's not enforceable in Kansas. Judges do not like what's called no assignment clauses. What they do allow is a clause that says you can only assign or sublease with the prior written consent of the landlord, let's say. This is real common with commercial leases, like I said. And, property law may get into this a little deeper about why this is and how it works. But these are some important general rules. The difference between an assignment and a sublease is that in an assignment, you actually assign over the original contract. And again, if there's no restrictions in the lease, the assignor is completely legally discharged from further responsibility. The sublease is technically a new lease. The original lease remains in effect between the first two parties, and the tenant is still liable for the rent directly to the landlord, but enters into a separate lease. Okay. Here's the relatively simple example. I'll use A, B, and C. A is the landlord, B is the original tenant, 5-year lease. After 2 years, the tenant goes out of business and moves out. If the lease is silent on assignment and sublease, B can find a replacement tenant. C moves in, takes over the rent, and B is legally discharged from any liability on rent. Landlord, I know this sounds kind of crazy, has to accept the rent check from C and cannot go after B. In fact, if C then moves out and they're still rent owing, landlord can only sue C. If, however, the lease has a clause that says B can only assign or sublease with landlord's prior written consent, then B has to go to the landlord and say, is it okay if I assign this lease over to C? And the purpose of that is so that the landlord can check the credit and the reputation of the new tenant. The landlord, though, is required to accept the payments no matter what from C, again, as part of the mitigation of damages. So that's how it works. The advantage of a sublease, I suppose, to the original tenant B, is that you could actually get more rent. Your original lease could say $5,000 a month. You're still liable to the landlord, however. And you enter into a sublease with C and get $6,000 a month. You can pocket the difference. The problem is if C moves out, then B still has to pay rent to the landlord, and B would have to sue C. $6,000 a month. And then I got this strange term called novation. Novation is actually used in several different legal settings, but what I want to explain right now is if the scenario I just gave you, B, if B moves out to cover himself, what he should do is get the landlord to consent and have the landlord sign a release that says, I hereby release B, tenant number one, from all further liability in the release and accept C as the new tenant. That's called a substitution of a party to a contract. The important thing is it means that B is completely released from liability. Third-party beneficiary, the general rule is that the only persons that have standing to sue for breach are the ones who entered into the contract. That makes sense. There's one exception other than assignment, and that is when at the time the contract was made, the original parties to the contract actually had a third person in mind, specifically in mind, that they wanted to benefit. It makes sense if you were what's called an intended beneficiary, that later, if there's a breach and you've been economically harmed, that you have standing to sue for breach. Non-competition agreement. Now, this is something that I really always make a big point of covering in my business software accounts class because so many accountants now sign non-competes. I'm going to explain what a non-compete is, and then I'm going to go through some general rules of enforceability and how they work, but this is really important. And the reason is because so many people are signing these things these days. So many employers are now requiring them, particularly in certain professions. And a non-competition agreement or covenant not to compete means the same thing, is a contract that states that you, let's say, will not compete with your former employer when you leave your job. That's what's called an employment non-compete. There's also a sale of business non-compete. When we talk about it first, it's the simpler of the two. When Pepsi bought Pizza Hut, and as you probably know, Pizza was begun by some Just Eat students. They obviously didn't want the Carney brothers to get all that money from Pepsi and then turn around and start a pizza company. So they had them into a non-compete. I've never seen it, but that it was pretty common knowledge. And for many, many years, in other words, it was probably about 15 years, that they could not be in the pizza business. The courts had no problem with non-competes with respect to sale of business for obvious reasons. You're getting money from sale, and you can understand why Pepsi didn't want it. So very well-known people started in the pizza business. But let's talk about the employment non-compete, because that's the one that some of you will be dealing with. Classic case is that the former employer has you sign a non-compete. They require you to sign a non-compete that states the basic concept is that when you leave your employment, you will not work for a competitor. And of course, we need to define what it means, who is a competitor, for a specific period of time and in a specific geographical area. Here's an example. Employee agrees that while employed with Atlas and for a period of 2 years after termination of employment by Atlas, by either party or for any reason, employees shall not, without consent of Atlas, engage in any business activities in competition in Sedgwick County. And then it goes on to define what it means by business activities. Let me translate what this clause says. You can't work for 2 years in Sedgwick County for any company that is in competition with Atlas. If you want to do your profession, you have to leave Sedgwick County. Or if you want to stay in Sedgwick County, you got to get a different job. These are very common with doctors, medical doctors. They are becoming, or have been for a while, common with accountants. They are common with engineers. They are common with, very common with salespeople. Here's the idea. We have trained you. We have provided you on a trade secrets. We have given you access to customer information, our business strategy, our business plans. And if you were to quit and go to work for a competitor, it could be devastating for us. We will lose that competitive advantage. You will be giving them our pricing list, our customer list. Probably the area where these are most justifiable, in my opinion, I used to do quite a few of these, is when you have a company that has salespeople out in the field, they're calling on businesses like lumber yards, let's say in small towns. They are the face of your company. The owners of the lumber yards don't know anybody personally except the salespeople. They build a relationship over time very well. And one day the salesperson walks in and says, I've been selling you Andersen windows, for years with my employer. A. I left my employment with A and I'm going to work for B. And I'm still going to be calling on this area. And I'm also going to be selling Andersen windows. So I really appreciate it if you move your business over to me. It's devastating because from the lumberyard's perspective, they're still Andersen windows and they're still dealing with you. Why do they care if it's company A or B? That is a problem. So they're very understandable in situations like that. And the purpose of the 2 years is to give the former company a chance to get new salespeople out there to build those relationships so they don't lose the business. With doctors, it's very similar. Clinics basically introduce them to the patients. The patients often go to the clinics. They have a big financial stake in the doctors, et cetera, et cetera. If the doctors were to just get up and leave and take those patients, it could be a significant economic problem. Now, there's some other things I want you to know about non-competes. One is that there seems to be a perception out there that non-competition agreements aren't taken seriously by anybody. I have literally had people in my office over the years who said, I'm being threatened with a lawsuit by my former employer. I'm thinking of one guy in particular. I went to work for a company and I got a letter from my former employer threatening to sue me for breach of contract non-competition saying that I'm in violation. And I would say, are you? Well, yeah, but I didn't think they'd take it seriously. And I'm like, what? So let me get this right. You sign a non-compete that says you can't work for a competitor for 2 years in Sedgwick County. And you quit on Friday and start on Monday with a competitor in Sedgwick County. What am I missing here? I literally had somebody say to me all the time, well, I was told these things aren't what the paper are written. I said, who told you that? My cousin. Who's your cousin? Well, he's an attorney in Texas. At that point, I got out of the map and said, we're in Kansas. We're still in Kansas. Now, my point is, in some states, they are worth the paper they're written. So here's one to remember. Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, by statute, most non-competes for employees are not legal. But this is Kansas. And they're very legal in Kansas. And my experience, and I've had people in the last few years tell me, I was talking to a lawyer here, he told me that these non-competes I've had students tell me, are really hard to enforce. I told you. I can give you lots of examples of cases, lots of examples, where my clients had to leave Kansas or leave Wichita or whatever. In one case, we represented 7 cardiologists in Wichita, Kansas, and the federal judge told them to get out of Dodge, or in this case, Wichita. They had to go to Kansas City. I've had several medical ones. I mean, these things are taken seriously. All right. What does your employer sue you for? And the answer is typically, not damages, because they would have to wait for us to see how much damage you did to them, and that would be bad. So typically they want to get you fired from your job, and the way they do that is through what's called the temporary restraining order, the TRO. It works like this. You quit on Friday, you go to work for a competitor on Monday. This is Wichita, they know about it Monday afternoon, if not before. They call their lawyer on Tuesday, the lawyer goes to court and gets an injunction called the TRO, then fires you. It says you cannot work for your employer until further notice. This is very serious. We've had several of these cases where this happened. So that's typically the remedy. Now, I said I would come back to liquidated damages. I've seen several cases involving doctors and even some with accountants, but In fact, we have several reported cases in Kansas where the contract says the doctor could not practice, let's say, family medicine in Sedgwick County for 2 years if you leave the clinic. And then it had a clause that said, however, if you choose to stay in Sedgwick County and practice as a family physician and breach the contract, you will pay as liquidated damages 25% of your first year's income with your new employer. That's the liquidated damage piece. And the judges like that because it shows that they're giving the person a choice. They can either leave the county, or if they really want to stay because they don't want to uproot their family, they just pay 25%, which would be roughly equivalent of the economic loss to the former employer. Now, there's a lot more to these non-competes that I'm even covering here. It's actually quite complicated, but I do want to end with this. What the Kansas Supreme Court has said is there are 4 factors that the courts will consider in trying to determine whether the non-competition agreement is legitimate, that it is enforceable. Okay, I'm going to go through all 4 of these factors. The last one we talked about previously, that the courts take contracts seriously, but the first 4 are what I talked about. And here's a very important takeaway for you. About the only time that I've seen or read cases where the court would completely throw out the non-compete as unenforceable is for factor number 1, where I can think of a couple cases where the court found that the employer did not have a legitimate business reason for requiring the non-compete. That, and the phrase is, all they were really doing was trying to avoid ordinary competition. They aren't really protecting customers, they aren't really protecting trade secrets or anything of the kind. They're just trying to avoid competition, and that is not a legitimate business interest. For it to be a legitimate business interest, the court said it has to be to protect trade secrets and investment in employee and things like that. Now, I should point out that the trade secret thing does not have to be part of the non-compete. The employer may have to sign what's called a confidentiality agreement, completely separate from the non-compete. Okay. Number 2, does the non-compete create an undue burden on the employee? Yes, because they have to move. I mean, when doctors have to move to Kansas City to not be in violation of the law and take their kids out of school and start moving, everything all over to the families, I would call that a burden. However, the courts have made it clear that's not an undue burden because you agreed to it. I have yet to see a case where they took this one seriously. I mean this literally. It looks to me like the courts just don't worry about that because their attitude is you knew what you're doing when you signed it. Number 3, this one's interesting. Does it injure the public welfare? I worked on some doctor cases, and we have some that are reported you can read where the courts have struggled with the issue. If a doctor is required to leave the area, yeah, that hurts the doctor, but what about the patients? What about their choice? What about forcing them to change doctors? And that one, the courts are struggling with a bit. So far, I haven't seen a case where they held the non-compete unenforceable, but we do have a case where they reduced the territory, the geographical scope. It was, the contract said 30 miles from Kansas City, and the court said that's much too broad because Kansas City is a big city. We're going to cut that down to 5 miles, which relates to number 4. Here's what you need to know about number 4. Time and territory is always argued. It's too long. It's too broad. Okay, as to the broad part, it's fact specific. In one case I worked on involving some high-level salespeople, it was nationwide. And the court held it. Long story. So that one, it really depends on the facts. I would say that generally speaking, 1 county, 3 or 4 counties is about all the courts would do. But they won't they won't throw out the contract as unenforceable. All they will do, as I said with the Kansas City case, is cut it down. That is reformation. They rewrite the territory from, let's say, the state of Kansas down to Sedgwick County. The time, the same thing. If the court feels that 3 years is too long for this particular circumstance,